Hey everybody, it's Steve here, and Happy New Year! I hope your holidays went well, cause mine certainly did. But now that we're all recovering from our New Year's, we gotta get down to business. And for me, that involves working on my next videos and preparing myself for the chaos that 2025 will inevitably deliver. But in that chaos, there are some things that are still for certain. And that's what I want to talk about here regarding transit and rail transport. Let's have ourselves a little ramble about what can be reasonably expected in 2025. A lot of good stuff is starting, more good stuff is being completed, and more is being mulled over as to what to do for the future, as more and more people realize that investing in public transit and rail is good for their futures in every sense, from the environment to the economy to their health, both physically and mentally. Some may think I'm being hyperbolic with the latter one, but I'm actually not. It's actually been found several times over that people who choose public transit have better mental health on the whole, let alone the physical health benefits. But anyways, let's get into some of the projects that I'm keeping tabs on, as well as what's in store for the channel going forward into the new year. Let's start this off with one of the big ones that I think everyone has been excited for, and that's for the beginning of heavy construction on Brightline West. For those that don't know or haven't watched my American High-Speed Rail video, Brightline West is a long-planned but now underway high-speed rail project that broke ground last year between Las Vegas and Rancho Cucamonga in Southern California's Inland Empire region. This line, for the most part, will run in the median of Interstate 15 across the desert, which is one of the main reasons as to why the project is only projected to cost $12 billion. Not quite as cheap as a typical HSR project in Europe, but getting pretty close, and it will open in 2028, with the goal still being to open it in time for the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. Whether that will all go to plan, we'll have to wait and see, but they seem to be doing alright so far. After groundbreaking, last year was mostly spent doing ground preparation and analysis for the actual construction, and that's supposed to begin in earnest this coming year. I personally would love to go out there and see it take place, but that definitely would be a cross-country matter for me. But thankfully, high-speed rail YouTuber par excellence Lucid Stew has said that he will be keeping close tabs on it, particularly since he's actually from that part of the country. He already has a video of him driving along the future route of the line, since it's basically just I-15 for much of the way in any case. But I'm definitely excited for this one on multiple levels. This would be the first purpose-built high-speed rail line to be completed in the US, and both where it is being built and the way it is being built seems like one of the best ways to advertise to the American public that high-speed rail is a thing that we have, it exists, and it is better than your car and better than your flight to places like these. And that's to say nothing of the marketing that this line would have on the people who choose to drive along I-15 when they're stuck in traffic in the middle of the desert. Yes, that is a thing that happens on that road. I've seen it and it makes me laugh in pain every time. And they see a Brightline train approaching. First from far away, it then catches up to you, and then boom, it roars by at 200 miles an hour. That really puts it in your face that this is the only way to travel between the LA basin and Vegas that will get you there in both speed and comfort. And because of that, as I alluded to in my American HSR video, this route can have the same effect that the Pennsylvania Turnpike, America's first superhighway, did in the 1940s, where it really puts it out there that this is the future of intercity travel. Flying sucks, and depending on where you are, it's slower than the train point to point, and driving is just agony. And the American people have been screaming for this since the 60s, and it's finally here. Or at least it will be, hopefully in 2028. But the heavy lifting is happening starting this year, and hopefully it all goes well. And it's certainly a lot faster than California high-speed rail's been going. But hey, at least they got something done recently too, so that's nice. Sticking on the topic of high-speed rail, we come to probably the main thing that I'm most excited for in terms of news this year, in that this year, in the spring, we will finally see Amtrak's Acela 2 trains, the Avelia Liberties, enter revenue service. If you know me, you know that this has been a long time coming, and it's been pain and agony ever since the first delays of their introduction happened, because these trains should have been in service back in 2021 when the first ones arrived on the scene. But they have just had problem after problem after problem, largely due to a rushed design, teething issues with being the guinea pig for a new generation of trains from Alstom, and just sheer insanity that I'll get more in depth with in the future after I ride them. But thankfully, things started to turn around for the better for these trains in 2024, when the FRA approved Alstom's computer modeling for the trains, and ever since then it's been pretty good for the time being. I have a friend who works in Amtrak's maintenance department who actually worked on the Acela 2s, and he has told me that the majority of issues with the trains has been resolved, with the main things left to settle being FRA final approval and crew training. Now, I've been seeing a rumor floating around since like October or November that the launch date for the trains is set in stone as being March 26th. But that date and information that was included in said rumor post was immediately questioned for being inconsistent with what was already known and presented. And what's more, my Amtrak friend countered it by saying, no, March 26th isn't even being considered, and the date will most likely be in late spring, so sometime in May or June would be the likely date we see the new trains enter service. Regardless of what date it is though, that day will see the first 5 sets enter revenue service alongside the remaining Acela 1s, which are already being whittled down with at least a set or two being stripped for spare parts to keep the other ones running. And after the launch, more sets will continue to come online until all 28 sets arrive to take over for the original 20 Acela 1 sets. It's not officially confirmed for sure what Amtrak will do with the old Acela sets, though I'm sure at least some parts of them will be preserved, and from what I've heard, there's some ideas of keeping them around, but that's something we have to see. Regardless, I have made a point that one of my videos this year will be of me riding the new Acelas on their first day of operations, since I've desperately wanted to ride these things since they were announced all the way back in 2016. They look great, objective fact, fight me. They're faster than the old trains, both in terms of top speed and current service, top speed with upgrades, since if the track was a dedicated high-speed line, these things could do 220 miles an hour, and they can even do 186 miles an hour with their tilting mechanism on. And even then, their top speed on current infrastructure is 160 miles an hour. And I routinely went out to film them on test runs where they were doing 165 through Princeton Junction, New Jersey. So these trains will be a big step forward, and assuming that they hold up well when they go into service, these could serve the NEC for the next 30 years plus, and could possibly be a basis for future trains to serve on this line and maybe others. Now that's a whole other discussion of course, but needless to say, the Avelia Liberty should be exciting to ride on, and I'm happy that things are starting to turn a corner in a positive way for these trains. Combine this with the upgrades underway for the NEC, then this is the start of something big for the future of transportation in the Northeast. I hope. Speaking of the NEC, I'll also be keeping tabs on the infrastructure upgrades on the Corridor 2, particularly what I call the Big Three. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel in Baltimore, the Susquehanna River Bridge replacement in northeastern Maryland, and the Gateway project in northern New Jersey, but also the upgrades to the electrical systems on the Corridor 2. Starting with the latter, this is something I made a whole video about this past summer. It got a few little views, so you might have missed it, but in any case, the long and short of it is that one of the big things holding back speeds on the NEC generally is the design of the overhead catenary wires that power the trains on the route, particularly that they are what I call variable tension catenary, but my Amtrak friend was quick to remind me that they're technically called fixed catenary, since they're fixed hard and fast to the poles that hold them. Makes sense. The problem with this setup though is that in the summer particularly, though it happens other times of the year too, the heat causes the wires to sag between the poles and make them drop out of their positions, leading to either trains be forced to slow down to compensate for this, or at worst, the wires get ripped down or they rip the pantographs off the tops of the trains, something we saw happen a few times this past year, even on SEPTA once for Pete's sake. The answer to this problem is to replace this type of wire, which dates back to the original electrification of the corridor in the 1930s, and replace it with constant tension catenary, which is essentially wire balanced by weights to compensate for expansion and contraction. This is not only much more reliable, but it allows for the trains to run faster. And the only parts of the NEC where the Acelas will be allowed to run at 160 miles per hour are able to do that because not only can the track alignment of the rails handle it, but the constant tension wires can handle that speed too. And it seems like someone was listening from all the complaints about this, since last month, the US DOT announced that $112 million would be going towards upgrading the section of the Northeast Corridor from New Brunswick to Newark, New Jersey to constant tension, which will connect to the existing section of CTC from New Brunswick to Hamilton, which is where the Acelas currently do 150 miles an hour through Princeton Junction, and they'll connect with the CTC that will be added on down the line as part of the Gateway project when the new pieces of infrastructure are in place. The end result will be nearly the entirety of the Northeast Corridor to New Jersey will be run under wires that won't break nearly as easily if it gets hot outside, and the speeds can be increased to 160 miles an hour on more parts of the route, at least on the parts of the line that are not made up of stupid S-curves. I'm looking right at Metuchen and Elizabeth here. Not only that, but another section of the line is getting funding for CTC upgrades. But it was not the one I was at first expecting, but I think I understand why. The section I was expecting was the one that Amtrak has been preparing for years, which is the section from Baltimore to Wilmington, Delaware, one that you can actually see the concrete bases for the CTC wires already set and ready to go for this upgrade. That's what these are here at Newark, Delaware, by the way. But this is not the part of the line getting this upgrade. Instead, the part of the line getting the good wires is the section from Baltimore to New Carrollton, Maryland, just before the approach to Washington, D.C. And for that, $96 million is going towards that upgrade, which is great to see too. It probably won't be as big a speed upgrade as the part in Jersey, but it will definitely be a reliability improvement all the same, and it will definitely get some consistent speed out of it too. Plus, with the curve straightening that Amtrak wants to do in the future, this can also become a properly fast section of the line in its own right, as well it should. Now, the obvious question remains here, why isn't this going towards Baltimore to Wilmington upgrades? Well, I think the answer is rather apparent in this case. They're waiting for a key infrastructure upgrade, which is the replacement of the Gunpowder River, Bush River, and Susquehanna River bridges to get closer to completion so that it can all be done in one fell swoop. All three of those bridges are getting replaced because they're as old as dirt, and the Susquehanna River Bridge is a massive momentum sink on the line. So the replacement bridges are going to be built to high-speed rail standards, approved for 160 mile an hour operation, and it isn't really worth having the bridge be capable of that when the wires aren't up to snuff when they are. So what I think is going to happen is that this upgrade will come when the first spans of the new bridges reach their completion, or at least the first spans on the new Susquehanna River Bridge does, since that's the big one of the three. And the reason I say the first span is because all these bridges are essentially two bridges built side by side of each other, so that when the new bridge is being built, the old one stays open, and when the new bridge is done, the old one is torn down and the second parallel bridge is being built, so that not only is the bridge itself faster, but capacity on the bridge and therefore the line is doubled. This is something that will be seen starting this year as well, as the Susquehanna River Bridge replacement will begin heavy construction in the spring of this year, according to my Amtrak friend and several other people I've talked to on the matter. This project isn't expected to completely bear fruit for another 10 years at this point, which, yeah, is silly, but obviously the first part will be completed much sooner, so there'll be at least some fruit to bear by the end of the decade, just not all of it. The pre-construction stuff on the bridge is done, and the crews will be ready to get going by the spring. I'll definitely be taking some trips to Perryville and Havre de Grace, Maryland to check in on it at points this year, no doubt. The other two of the big three are moving along, albeit at different paces. On the positive side of things, there's the Gateway project, which has had the cornerstone piece of it, the second Hudson River tunnels, fully funded, and their construction has already begun. Then there's the Portal North Bridge project, which I talked about in my NEC Wires video, which is coming along beautifully, and the arches for the bridge are making their appearance and getting installed. On top of that, the final design of the replacement of the Sawtooth bridges in Kearney just got fully funded, so it's safe to say this project is coming along quite well for one of its scope, and a lot better than some other infrastructure projects I can name. Speaking of which, the Frederick Douglass Tunnel.
Ah boy, here we go.
Yeah, this one's gonna be fun. So, this project is a replacement of the 1870s vintage, let me repeat that, 1870s vintage Baltimore and Potomac tunnels that lead south out of Baltimore Penn Station towards Washington, D.C. These tunnels, as you'd expect, are a mess, and the speed can be as low as 35 miles an hour through them. So naturally, this project is to build new tunnels that, while it is a technically longer route, allow for speeds of 110 miles an hour. So this will noticeably shave time off the journey and make the route infinitely more reliable and increase capacity too. This project has a substantial amount of its admittedly massive budget obtained, and work has begun with some demolition work being done before the tunnel can be dug in earnest. However, there is still ongoing debate and even lawsuits over how the plan is being executed, with the biggest concern seeming to stem from Amtrak being poor communicators about the effects that the project will have on locals, which is leading to a court case over the matter, largely centered around the addition of ventilation shafts in the tunnel, which is a common thing I see brought up with tunneling projects, sadly. I don't think this case will have the effect of stopping the project, since all the approvals have gone through and the shovels are effectively in the ground now. And the time frame for the project again is for it to be done in the 2030s, which is still long, but at least there is a light at the end of the metaphorical tunnel that's not just from an oncoming metaphorical train about to hit you. All of these projects are ones that I'll keep close eye on throughout these years, and will likely get footage of them when I can as they proceed, since I'm certain to talk about them in the future, along with all the other stuff that's being pursued to truly make the NEC live up to its sky-high potential. Sticking with Amtrak, after a year where a new Amtrak corridor route made its debut and utterly smashed all expectations, referring of course to the very successful Borealis service between Chicago and the Twin Cities, there's another new Amtrak corridor service that will be making its debut this year, and it's one that I've been looking forward to for a while, since it's in a place that not many people would think would clamor for a new rail service, but it seems like they are. And that is the arrival of an Amtrak service on the Gulf Coast between New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama, serving Biloxi and Pascagoula, Mississippi along the way, with the service seeming to take its working name of the Mardi Gras, which I really like, honestly. This will be the first time that a corridor train has served this city pair since the last run of the Gulf Coast Limited in 1997, and the first time that a scheduled passenger service has run along this line since 2005, which was when the Sunset Limited was cut back from Miami to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina washed out the tracks, and CSX sold the tracks in the Florida Panhandle to a Class 3 railroad that seems to hate the idea of working with Amtrak. But after years of haggling with CSX, Norfolk Southern, the Mobile Port Authority, the state governments, and the Surface Transportation Board, this service will finally start running, supposedly in late spring or early summer at the current rate. It was originally supposed to be in February, but it was recently delayed. I'd love to ride it for myself, but I doubt I'd be able to get down there in time for the first run, but I definitely want to at some point if I'm down that way, since a success story on the Gulf Coast, one of the places that a casual observer would say would be hostile to rail service, it could end up being one of those subtle hints that trains are on their way back into a wider consciousness, and not just those of bigger urban areas. I mean, hey, places like Alabama and Mississippi need good train service too. They had it in the past, didn't they? And thanks particularly to the efforts of the Southern Rail Commission, owners of the best train-related slogan ever, "Y'all aboard." Yes, really. This, I think, has a good chance of succeeding. I'm not expecting it to be as big a success as the Borealis, but that's just because the Borealis was so bleeding obvious a service to run that it was destined to be a success. How much of a success it was going to be was the question. This may be a bit of a trickier litmus test, but I have hopes for it. Have fun on the Mardi Gras, guys. I hope to see y'all on it one day. And another one to quickly mention that was touched on by Alan Fisher a little while back, but it's definitely worth a mention too, comes from Colorado. So, if you've ever taken the Amtrak California Zephyr through Colorado before, and if you haven't, you should, it's amazing, then you'll know that part of the route goes through the 6-mile-long Moffat Tunnel through the Rocky Mountains and the Continental Divide. The line that route runs on was under a lease to Union Pacific, which was the company that absorbed the route's previous leaser, the Denver and Rio Grande Western, in the 1990s. And aside from their freight trains, the route sees 3 passenger services run on the line too. Technically, anyway. You have the California Zephyr, the overnight sleeper train that runs daily along the route through Colorado on its way from the Bay Area to Chicago. You have the Winter Park Express, which runs part of the route from Denver to Winter Park for the popular skiing market. And there's also the Rocky Mountaineer, a luxury tourist train service that I barely count as a passenger service, but is worth mentioning, which runs from Denver to Moab, Utah. Well, recently, something significant about this route just happened. That lease that Union Pacific had on the line, which was to run for 99 years, just expired, and the route goes back to its owner, which just so happens to be the state government of Colorado. What does this mean exactly? Well, it means that the state can finally have the right of way to introduce what they wanted to do for a while, a daily Amtrak corridor service running between Denver and Craig, Colorado, serving Winter Park, Granby, and Steamboat Springs along the way. Now, these are all small towns when you really get down to it. Steamboat Springs is only around 13,000 people, and Craig is around 9,000. But this is aimed to be a route served by 3 daily round trips between Denver and Craig. Sounds a bit nuts, but these places are rather isolated from the state capital, being on the other side of the Rockies, so having a good rail connection there would be a lifeline for these little towns. And it could perhaps serve as a jumping off point for another corridor service into Utah to Salt Lake City. Add to this the heavily pursued Front Range corridor service that's being planned from Pueblo to Colorado Springs, Denver, Fort Collins, and maybe Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the state that most people equate to Switzerland could be a step closer to the Swiss in another regard too. I mean, they already have a pretty cool regional rail network for Denver, so they're closer than some people might think. Go get 'em, Colorado. And moving to a more general topic, spring of this year is expected to be the beginning of round 2 of the research grants to more Amtrak routes of the Corridor ID project, which was started by the 2021 infrastructure law. Now, there is a fair amount of worry about whether this will continue with a new administration taking office in the meantime, but I have a reason to be a bit more optimistic than some, since some of the routes I've seen be pushed to receive these study grants are going to be coming from states that voted for the current administration, such as Utah and their Wasatch Front Corridor, Idaho with their Salt Lake City to Boise service via Pocatello that should have been in the first one but wasn't because of an embarrassing clerical error, and some benefiting swing states too, such as the New York to Allentown, Pennsylvania corridor. Now, I could very definitely be proven wrong here, but with the politics of intercity transportation slowly but steadily becoming less red versus blue and more purple by the day, especially regarding intercity transport like this that improves existing infrastructure for both freight and passengers alike, this could be a better situation than some people fear. This one though, I'll definitely keep in mind when spring comes around. Okay, next up we're moving from intercity rail to commuter and regional rail, and we got a few of them that I'm keeping close tabs on. First, we go up to Massachusetts, where the first phase of the MBTA's South Coast Rail project will open in May. So, what's the story with this? This is a 2-phase project where the first is effectively an extension of the MBTA's Middleborough-Lakeville line to Taunton, and from there it goes on to 2 different branches, one to Fall River and the other to New Bedford. This is all going to open in May of this year, and Phase 2 will connect this section from Taunton to the north up to Stoughton, and from there will allow trains on this section to run on the Stoughton branch of the MBTA's Providence-Stoughton line, or for the non-mass holes in the audience, the Northeast Corridor. So this is a pretty exciting extension, bringing rail service back on more of the old colony lines. And in this case, these towns are seeing rail service again for the first time since the New Haven stopped running these services in 1958. So yeah, it's been a long time coming. And all of it for a cool $1 billion for Phase 1 and $3.4 billion for the whole project. Honestly, I've seen worse regarding the cost of a project this substantial. And when this is all said and done, Southeast Massachusetts will truly have a pretty sizable regional rail network that could very well be something that a lot of other states aspire to. This is what I hope to see when I go up to Boston next, which I want to do sometime this year and see if I can make a trip down this part of the state while I'm at it. And inevitably sample the Dunkin' Donuts that will be across the street from whatever station I get off at. It's Massachusetts, just watch, it's bound to happen. Also opening in May is another commuter rail extension, this time to one of the most interesting commuter rail routes in a state you almost never think of regarding rail transit expansion, Indiana. That's right, it's the opening of the South Shore Line's Monon corridor. This is a 9-mile long branch off of the main South Shore Line, which runs from Chicago's Millennium Station to South Bend, Indiana, and is all electrified, by the way, since it's an old interurban. This branch will run pretty much directly south from Hammond, Indiana to Munster and Dyer, and has been planned since the 2000s and has been actively built since 2017, essentially reviving a lost section of the old Monon Railroad, most of which is owned now by CSX, but this one will be owned by the state of Indiana and the Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District, NICTD. This branch will mostly be single-tracked with a single passing siding, which I'll note the South Shore Line main line recently had a major duplication project to extend double track on its route, so this service has definitely been getting a good amount of love recently, as well it should. From what I'm reading, the service to Munster and Dyer will mostly be run as a shuttle off-peak, with through trains to Chicago being run in the rush hours, and the rebuilt Hammond Station will be built to accompany that. Again, I gotta check this one off the next time I'm in the Chicago area. Could be by the time Metra gets those Alstom coaches or those Battery Stadler flirts, but could also be before, ideally though the latter. And hey, good on you Indiana for at least having one place where you invest in rail. I wish I could say the same about Indianapolis, but apparently you guys get pissy when a freaking BRT is planned. Something for another day maybe, but good job on this one, Hoosiers. And up next, we go out to the West Coast for a small, under-discussed route and project in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that's the extension of the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, or SMART service, to Windsor. For those who don't know about this one, SMART is a commuter rail line that first opened on the north side of the bay in 2017 and runs from Larkspur in the south right on the north shore of San Francisco Bay, where you can get a ferry to San Francisco, and runs 45 miles through Marin and Sonoma counties to San Rafael, Novato, and Santa Rosa to Sonoma County Airport. However, the overall mandate for the line is for it to eventually reach 70 miles to Cloverdale, which is right at the northern edge of Sonoma County and pretty much the furthest north that any reasonable person could say that the Bay Area goes to. As part of this vision, the SMART service, which, by the way, they run some pretty interesting Nippon Sharyo DMUs, pretty much like the ones on the Union Pearson Express in Toronto, except these had a buffet on them before COVID, which is pretty cool. But anyways, this is going to be the first extension of a few from Sonoma Airport, this one being pretty short at about 4 miles to downtown Windsor before the big extensions come in 2027, initially to Healdsburg and then to Cloverdale. This first extension will only cost around $55 million, largely because it's some track upkeep, new platforms, and gauntlet tracks at the Windsor station. Yeah, that's a thing SMART does because it shares track with freight trains. And I think this will be a nice little extension to a line that doesn't really get discussed very often, but I think is worth a look. And the next time I make a trip to the Bay Area, this will definitely be one route I take a detour to see. And that's to say nothing of actually getting to ride the ferries in San Francisco to get there. And of course riding Caltrain, because obviously. And speaking of Caltrain, their planned extension of the diesel part of their line from its southern terminus at Gilroy to Salinas is looking to happen this year as part of the Monterrey County Rail Extension Project. Currently, this part of the line only sees passenger service by Amtrak's Coast Starlight, but this would be a more commuter-oriented service, and I do mean that sincerely, since this is supposed to be a through service using diesel trains apparently, with 2 trains running from Salinas to San Francisco in the morning, and 2 from San Fran back to Salinas in the evening. That's according to some of the articles I've read, but I do wonder how the interaction of the slower diesel trains and the quicker electrics on the Caltrain route will go, since the few diesels that they do have left don't interact with the electrified part of the line anymore. But more will be known about this soon, I think, and if anyone knows any more, please tell me. From what I'm seeing, the big thing they're working to finish up on is on Amtrak's end, and that's improving ADA accessibility at Salinas Station, and from there, the service should begin. I haven't been able to find a date as to when this is supposed to start, but there's general reports saying sometime this year, so I'll add it here for the sake of it. And now we come to a commuter rail project that I definitely have a lot of interest in, and in fact it ties into the very first video I ever made on this channel. So for those that watched it or didn't, I'll have a link here. I made a video about the story of the SEPTA Westchester line in the Philadelphia area, and how it was cut back and then re-extended to its present terminus at Wawa in 2022, and I talked about the several plans over the recent years to bring the line back to Westchester. One of these ideas, and definitely the most outlandish one out there, was to run a shuttle service between Wawa and Westchester using what's known as the pop-up metro. The long and short of this is that it's a shuttle service that will be run by battery electric rail cars built out of former London Underground subway cars from the 1970s, and set up temporary platforms for the route under a leasing agreement while a more permanent idea is considered. As crazy as this sounds, I actually like the concept in principle, but I and several other people that I talked to, including in the video, were severely questioning whether this would work for multiple reasons. But it seems as though the Borough of Westchester's Rail Service Committee is still trying to keep the dream alive. But as for the pop-up metro itself, the company behind it, Railroad Development Corporation, which is based in Pittsburgh and runs its demonstrations at the Rock Hill Trolley Museum in central Pennsylvania, may finally have its mythical first chance, and nowhere near where any of us would reasonably expect. Iowa. Yes, that Iowa. Specifically, this is an idea by the city of Iowa City, with a decent population of 75,000, for what's essentially a light commuter rail service using the pop-up metro, running from Iowa City to North Liberty, 8 miles away, and serving the campus of the University of Iowa in the process, and would even serve Kinnick Stadium, the home of the University of Iowa Hawkeyes. It's definitely an interesting first place to try it, but it can definitely make sense serving a lot of students at the university and regular commuters alike, running on the existing right-of-way of the Cedar Rapids and Iowa City Railroad, or the Crandic. I can definitely get behind this idea, and while I'd love to see it run all the way up the Crandic line between Iowa City and the much larger city of Cedar Rapids, I'm willing to let it cook and see how this initial idea gets started. It's a strange idea, sure, to the casual observer, but again, it's trying out a new idea in a unique place that could possibly work well, and if it works over the projected 3-year lease deal that the county will have for the service, you can see this concept used to revive a lot of little lost branch line services that haven't seen passenger trains in decades. Again, no date's been set in stone for this, but according to news articles, they want to have this started by the fall of this year. Note to self, pay a visit to Rock Hill Furnace to see these trains off if it does end up happening. And as a final little one for the commuter and regional rail stuff, there's one that I'm looking forward to for my home city of Philadelphia, which is a small extension of the regional rail network this year. And that will be the extension of the Paoli-Thorndale line service along the Keystone Corridor from its current end terminus of the Park and Ride at Thorndale to the actual proper town of Coatesville, Pennsylvania, which already has an Amtrak station there served by the Keystone service. Now, the main reason for re-extending the line here, and I say re-extended because it ran out this far and even all the way out to Parksburg in the 1990s until being cut by the end of the decade, is because Coatesville Station is being rebuilt, largely for ADA accessibility upgrades because the old station was a low-level platform. But once that's done, both Amtrak and SEPTA services will serve Coatesville Station, which is very good because Thorndale was a pretty mediocre terminal to me, both because it was a park and ride far away from where a lot of people were, but also because Thorndale Yard, which is where the station is both an active part of the Keystone Corridor right-of-way and also being a rapidly fading freight yard for Norfolk Southern, and it looked like an absolute mess from a logistical standpoint to get trains turned around in. Hopefully, Coatesville will make things a tad bit easier, and also brings a more frequent rail service back to a town of 13,000 who would really stand to benefit from having more than just the Keystone and the SEPTA 135 bus to get anywhere near Center City without a car. Now, this one is one I hope to attend in person, like I did at the reopening of Wawa Station in 2022, but as of now, we don't know for certain when it will happen, though I've seen that the work is progressing quite well at least, so I'll very likely have more up-to-date reports on this than most people would. Keep an eye out. And with that, we'll now move away from commuter and regional rail and move to the realm of rapid transit and light rail. And there are quite a few things to talk about, though weirdly enough, there seems to be one particular city where a lot of news regarding transit extensions are going to come from. And that is where I'm going to start first. That city is none other Then Los Angeles. Yes, that Los Angeles. A city that has definitely been going through quite a lot recently. And to be serious for a moment, I'm hoping as many people as possible escape the wildfires that are ravaging the area with their lives, their families, and their homes intact. And with any hope, the projects that I talk about here can at least bring some joy and hope for the future as they come online this year. Now, for those of you who have been living under a rock, Los Angeles is seriously attempting to try to shake its image of being a traffic jam first and a city second. And the LA metro system has been built out fairly well over the last little while, though there is a lot more to come. Recent highlights have included the opening of the Regional Connector, which connects the initially disconnected light rail lines that were bound for downtown LA into a proper through-running system, as well as providing connections to two separate heavy rail subway lines, with a particularly cool side effect of all of it making the A line the longest light rail line in the entire world. Suck it, Belgium. There's also been the opening of the first phase of the new K-Line light rail, which is set to be a pretty big focus of discussion not just here but in the coming years, and also the arrival of the new trains for the two subway lines, the B and D lines built by CRRC. Yes, I know, let's save that controversy for later, please. Regarding the LA Metro, there's 3 big projects that will finally be ready this year. First up is the long-awaited extension of the D-Line subway. Of the 2 heavy rail subway lines in LA, the D-Line is that stubby little thing that barely sticks out from the B-Line, and it's been that way since it opened in 1993. It's already been envisioned to have extensions, and finally, that's starting to take shape. The complete extension of the D-Line won't be finished until 2027 or 2028, hopefully just in time for the Olympics. But the first phase of the extension along Wilshire Boulevard from the current terminus at Wilshire Western and its new temporary terminus at Wilshire La Cienega will finally open in December, and they'll not only considerably extend the line, but it will do so on a very dense corridor that will certainly give the D line a major boost in ridership, serving stops in the Miracle Mile and Beverly Grove before it finally reaches one of the most famous cities of the region and home to many a NIMBY who's complained about this objective good for their city, Beverly Hills. That's right, you will now be able to take a subway to Beverly Hills. Not quite to the famous Rodeo Drive yet, that's coming in phase 2 of the extension, and that's set to open in 2026 to Century City. And finally, the last phase of the extension is due to open in 2027, reaching to Westwood, and having a final terminus of Westwood VA Hospital Station, with the route serving UCLA in the process. When this is all said and done, the D-Line will have nearly tripled in length, from 5 miles to 14, and it will give proper high-frequency and high-speed service to one of the densest parts of the LA area. Maybe one day we'll see it go all the way to Santa Monica on the coast, but for the time being, this is going to be a big step forward regardless, since even this Phase 1 that will be completed this year is going to get a good amount of ridership almost right away. And perhaps broadly, it shows that when transit NIMBYs, even from a neighborhood as rich and snooty as Beverly Hills, go up against a transit agency, government, and public that has the determination to see this through, transit will win. Compromises will be made perhaps, but it's not stopping them from getting something genuinely good that, due to sheer ignorance or malicious intent, they refuse to accept it as the good that it is. It's a reoccurring theme in LA, but it's gratifying to see it's pushing past the stupidity and getting some meaningful stuff done. Speaking of which is our second one, which is the opening of a particular station on LA's light rail network and the connections between 2 and soon to be 3 services that this station will entail. This is the opening of LAX Metro Transit Center Station, which is shaping up to be a grand station as these things go, serving as the connection between the disconnected sections of the K-Line, and we'll see the northern part extended here from Westchester Veterans and the southern part extended from Aviation Century, and finally creating a connected corridor from Expo Crenshaw all the way to Redondo Beach. And this will also connect with the C line, which currently runs from Aviation Century to Norwalk, and in the process serving this abomination unto God in the middle of the 105 freeway. So this station will be a major connecting point in and of itself, and as its name suggests, it's built to serve one of the most important destinations you can possibly serve with a transit service, LAX. Los Angeles International Airport, one of the busiest airports on the planet. But if we look at where LAX Metro Transit Center Station is, you'll notice that it's not actually at LAX itself. So how are passengers going to get there? Well, that's where the third service that will connect to this station comes into play, just not immediately upon opening, which I'll note doesn't have a current set date except for just sometime this year. For several years now, LAX has been building the LAX Automated People Mover, which is exactly what it sounds like, an automated rail people mover that will run between the airport terminals and the new LAX Metro Transit Center station, and eventually to a gigantic consolidated rental car facility just beyond, which will open in 2026. Needless to say, this is an absolutely crucial link for the LA Metro that they needed to have on their network yesterday. Since according to both Angelinos and outsiders alike, LAX is an absolute nightmare to get to. And this should have a pretty big hand in making people's trips to the airport at least a tad bit less miserable. At least before they get on the flight itself, that is. I have no doubt that this will be a hit and get a lot of ridership, especially for the K line, which could easily go from being one of the least ridden lines on LA Metro to one of its most ridden in the span of a couple of years, especially with the purported car-free Olympic Games in a few years becoming probably the biggest litmus test for any transit system, particularly one like LA's. And this is going to be one of the key ingredients to make that goal anywhere close to feasible. And finally, the last project of the LA Metro to talk about is a smaller one by comparison, but it's one to give LA even more brownie points over the rest of the world in one regard. Remember how I was talking about the LA Metro's A line earlier? Well, that line currently runs all the way from APU Citrus College Station in Azusa all the way in the northwest of LA County, and then runs east through downtown LA and then turns south, running all the way south to Long Beach, making the A line a massive 49 miles long and making it the longest light rail line in the entire world. Well, guess what? That line's gonna get even longer this year. Yep. The A-Line's Foothill extension will see the A-Line reach even further west from its northern terminus, going from APU Citrus College and serving 4 more stops and extending it an extra 9 miles to serve stops in Glendora, San Dimas, and Laverne Fairplex before reaching its new terminus of Pomona North, where passengers can transfer to the San Bernardino line of the Metrolink commuter rail network. This extension should be opening later this winter, and another extension of the A-Line can begin from here. Oh yeah, you thought this thing couldn't get any longer? LA Metro says hold my beer. A final 3 miles of the Foothill extension will begin to be built here and will extend into 2 more Metrolink stations on the San Bernardino line at Claremont and finally to Montclair, thus bringing the A line to an absolutely nuts 61 miles long, far outstripping anything else in the realm of light rail in terms of distance covered. These new stations will make for a very interesting supplementary service to Metrolink, which is already in the midst of an update to its services by way of the SCORE program, which looks to massively boost frequencies of their services and make them truly viable complementaries to the A-Line, and make them much more competitive against car traffic on the freeways. Not to mention, it's nice to see an American transit line be a world leader in something positive, even if it is just a measuring contest. And before we move on, I do have one more project in SoCal to talk about, but this one actually doesn't involve the LA Metro at all. In fact, it's not technically in LA, and the people from this part of SoCal will look at you probably with a bit of disgust when you say that they're a part of it. This is LA County's snooty neighbor to the south, Orange County, California. There, the county's transit operator, Okta, one often derided as being one with a lack of will to enact a vision, is finally getting something done in the realm of rail transit. August of this year will see the opening of the OC Streetcar, a modern streetcar line between the Santa Ana Regional Transit Center, where passengers can connect with Metrolink's Orange County and Inland Empire Orange County lines, as well as Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner service, before traveling through downtown Santa Ana, running as many of LA Metro's lines do along the routes of the formerly legendary Pacific Electric Railway, serving 10 stations before reaching the Harbor Transit Center in Garden Grove, where passengers can connect to local bus services, and thus bringing the streetcar to a distance of 4.15 miles in length. It's honestly pretty rare in a lot of places to see suburban counties to major cities invest into transit, let alone rail transit. But LA is seeming to be an exception to that rule at last. First with the Aero service between San Bernardino and Redland, regardless of how effective it's been, and now the OC streetcar. And while there is another glaringly obvious project for them to build that would be an absolute godsend for the region's transit, build the center line! It's nice to see this come along to warm them up to the idea, perhaps. I never thought I'd say this, but good job, Orange County. And before I move on, if you want even more nerdy detail about the transit projects of SoCal and advocacy for them, definitely check out the channel Nandered, which is run by a filmmaker and transit advocate who makes easily some of the most well-edited and presented transit videos you will ever see, and does some of the most delicious takedowns of NIMBY stupidity you will see out there. I swear, he's gonna make all these projects happen just by his sheer force of will, so check him out. But finally, let's take a trip away from sunny SoCal and look elsewhere for our next spot of good news. How about a city that many would say is the polar opposite in so many ways to LA? Buffalo, New York. Admit it, you forgot that Buffalo has a light rail service, didn't you? And it's kind of a weird one too. One that runs on street in downtown Buffalo and running in underground tunnels when it gets closer to the suburbs, which if you want to know why that is, Classy Whale has a video on it here. In any case, the current Buffalo Metro Rail line runs 6.1 miles from the University of Buffalo to a station in downtown Buffalo simply known as Special Events, where passengers can get off for games at the nearby Keys Bank Center, home of the Buffalo Sabres, those poor unfortunate souls. But now this current terminus is actually getting replaced by a new end terminus just around the corner, pretty much literally, at the historic Lackawanna Railroad train station along the shore, which sadly doesn't see passenger trains anymore. And in fact, the station will be renamed in the honor of the old railroad, the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, by being called DL&W Station, and it will serve both the waterfront and the arena. This is essentially a yard station extension, where the track already exists and it was largely a matter of building the station, and it's a pretty short one too, but still an extension regardless. And the old station that the Metro line uses as a maintenance yard is certainly a much grander terminus than the old one was. Nice to see something happen to one of the most underloved transit lines I can think of, and one that a lot of people forgot exists. Well, it does. It's kind of weird, but it's got something good. Note to try it next time I'm in Buffalo, even if it is a long way from the actual Amtrak station there. Seriously, why? And as if climate whiplash wasn't bad enough the first time, we go right back into the heat, all the way to the tropics this time, because we're gonna talk about Hawaii. Yes, Hawaii. And apologies in advance when I mispronounce the vast majority of these. I've done like so many takes of this, I think I got it right, but I'm almost certain I butchered at least one or two of them. Anyway, it's time to talk about one of the most interesting and strangest transit projects I can think of, the Honolulu Skyline. For those who don't know, the Skyline is an elevated automated metro system, which is eventually slated to run 20 miles from Kalia Station near the Ala Moana Shopping Center in downtown Honolulu and run to Kuala'aki Station in East Kapolei. Now, the first phase of the line has actually opened to the public, but it's not the phase one might expect. Now, normally you would think that when you're building a transit line, particularly a metro, you would want to build the line that would get the highest ridership first, likely in a place with high density, like downtown Honolulu in this case. But no, not in this case. This line is being built from the suburbs into the city, not the other way around, since the first segment of the Skyline that was opened in 2023 runs 10.8 miles from Kuala'aki to Halawa Station near the Aloha Stadium, which, for those that don't know, is not in downtown Honolulu, not even close. As such, it's sadly been kind of mocked as a train to nowhere thus far, but this second phase hopes to alleviate that, at least to a degree. This next extension, at 5.3 miles long, will go from Halawa to Kuala'iki Station, which will see the line serve the airport and the very edge of downtown Honolulu and integrate better with local buses. This will definitely make the line much more usable and give it a needed boost to ridership, while the third phase of the line will be completed, which will serve downtown Honolulu proper. At 3 miles long, that phase is expected to open in 2031. As for the current extension, it's expected to get started late this year, and I really do hope that it can provide the boost the line so desperately needs. Since I heard about this line, I kinda saw it in a similar vein as the LA Metro K line, in that you just need to keep building it for it to get actually good. And I hope it can and shake off that train to nowhere tag, since this line can properly serve a lot of high profile places on Oahu when it's completed. Next time you're in Hawaii, you could have a chance to ride some world-class transit, and that would be great, especially when it goes somewhere useful. Okay, there's no climate whiplash on this one since we're staying in a place that's hot again, except it's even hotter than the last one. I'm talking about the absolute insane monument to man's arrogance that is Phoenix, Arizona. Just like Buffalo, I think a lot of you forgot that Phoenix does indeed have a light rail system, the Valley Metro Rail, which at present runs nearly 30 miles, already pretty long, from the recently opened Metro Parkway station in the northwest of Phoenix proper, and runs south into downtown Phoenix before turning east to run through the connected city of Tempe, where one can connect with the really quite charming Tempe streetcar to serve parts of a city that's legitimately trying with transit-oriented development and doing pretty good with it. From there, the route continues west to the final stop at Gilbert Road Main Street Station in another connected city, Mesa. As I said earlier, Valley Metro just recently opened an extension back in January of last year, when the extension to Metro Parkway opened. But this next one, opening in June, called the South Central Extension, is not just an extension, it's a branch off of the main line. When the line reaches downtown Phoenix, it will run nearly 5 miles to the south and serve 7 new stations after the branch begins at the downtown Phoenix hub near City Hall, and head down towards Central Avenue to its new terminus in South Central Phoenix at Baseline Central Avenue Station. Naturally, since this is a branch, it will require the creation of a new service pattern to serve this area. And from what I understand, this will be a service that will run from Baseline Central to Metro Parkway, with passengers wanting to go to Tempe and Mesa having to transfer downtown, which with the current headways being 15 to 20 minutes, that's not bad, but it's not world-beating either. So yeah, have fun in the dry heat for a bit. But overall, good extension, and thankfully there's more to come too. There's another extension being worked on, the Capital Extension, which will be another branch, which intersects with all the other lines at the downtown hub, but this will be a branch of the part of the line that goes to Tempe and Mesa, creating a true central connecting point for all services going north, south, east, and west. This extension is much shorter at less than a mile, but it will serve the Arizona state capital and is aimed to open in 2028, with that project currently in environmental review. And that will be a springboard to an even longer extension of that line, which will parallel Interstates 10 and 17 to its final planned stop at 79th Avenue and Thomas Station, with this one aiming to be done by 2030. Say what you will about the Phoenix area as a whole, and a lot of people certainly have in this sphere, but this is definitely a good attempt to solve some of the latent problems that makes Phoenix so cripplingly unsustainable to live in the long term, especially its out-of-control sprawl problem, since there are so many opportunities for creating density around these stops that it will encourage people to live closer to downtown. Tempe has already been leading the charge on that front with a lot of development around the Tempe streetcar, an actually good example of the so-called Obama streetcars. And now the Valley Metro Light Rail has a lot of opportunities popping up wherever it reaches in the coming years. And that'll continue this year with the South Central extension. Just stay hydrated down there on opening day, please. Speaking of the Obama streetcars, we got another extension of one of the good ones, and that's the extension of the KC streetcar in Kansas City. The KC streetcar is easily one of the biggest success stories of the downtown streetcar craze of the 2010s in a sea of mediocre and failed ones. As it stands, the KC streetcar sees just shy of 2 million riders a year, which puts it up there with a lot of light rail services in bigger, denser cities, since it was done correctly and connects a lot of parts of downtown that are within reasonable distance that people want to go to, and it does so quickly, frequently, and comfortably. Plus, the fact that it's free to ride certainly adds to the appeal as well. And now, we're gonna get even more good places added to the list. Currently, the route goes north-south from River Market in the north on the banks of the Missouri River and runs south through downtown Kansas City to the famous Kansas City Union Station, which is both the main Amtrak station in the city for the Southwest Chief and Missouri River Runner services, but is also a prominent event space and is oftentimes the backdrop of the inevitable supremacy of the Kansas City Chiefs in their Super Bowl celebrations. If it's not going to be this year, it'll be the next, and certainly in years past. They become the New England Patriots of old. God help us. In any case, this extension that's set to open in the first quarter of this year with the full track laying being completed will see the streetcar nearly triple in length as it heads further south through the neighborhood of Westport to its new end terminal at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is always a good sign for ridership when a line serves a college campus and a thriving downtown, which it seems like KC is making great strides towards. See? Streetcars can be good. All you need is just to do it properly.
Dallas, TC.
I mean, hey, why do you think Philly, Boston, and San Fran kept their streetcars? After this extension, there's a shorter one being built at the northern end of the line where it will follow the Missouri River to Berkeley Riverfront Park and the CPKC Arena. Yes, that is sponsored by the railroad company, which is home to the Kansas City Current of the National Women's Soccer League. Oh yeah, soccer's kind of a big deal in KC. They love their teams there. Overall, sounds like a good extension and more good stuff on the way for a rare example of a modern streetcar done right. Plus, I have no doubt that it can take me to some delicious Kansas City barbecue the next time I go out there. And rounding out the big route completions, we head all the way to the northwest to the land of tech bros, coffee houses, and cycling up and down hills that's not San Francisco. We're headed to Seattle, as the long-celebrated Sound Transit Link Light Rail network is getting its newest extension. Last year saw the grand opening of the second route of the Link Light Rail, fittingly called the 2 Line, or the East Link Extension, on its initial segment running from Redmond, the home of the global headquarters of Microsoft, to Bellevue on the eastern shore of Lake Washington, across the water from Seattle proper. So, yeah, this was kind of a dinky first section at 6.6 miles long. And in the meantime, Sound Transit has been working on completing the most important part of the project, which was modifying the Homer M. Hadley Memorial Bridge, a just over mile-long pontoon bridge that carries Interstate 90. Yeah, this bridge is not anchored to the surface of the lake. The bridge was modified to have its old express lanes replaced by the tracks of the 2 Line, and thus it will have the 2 Line connect with the 1 Line at International District Chinatown Station in downtown Seattle. This, along with an extension on the opposite end of the line from the current terminus at Redmond Technology Station to downtown Redmond that will open around the same time in November this year, will see the line go from 6.6 miles to 18 miles long. And of course, it will properly connect the route to the rest of Sound Transit's light rail, the First Hill streetcar service, aka the good streetcar in Seattle, and the buses of King County Metro. Not to mention that it's right next to King Street Station, thus allowing the 2 Line to connect with Amtrak Cascades trains to Vancouver, BC, Portland, and Eugene, Oregon, Sound Transit's Sounder commuter rail trains to Tacoma and Everett, and Amtrak's long-distance Coast Starlight and Empire Builder, which could make the 2 Line a jumping off point for long-distance journeys to LA and Chicago. From everything I've been seeing about Link Light Rail, while the general consensus from people is that Seattle could have been better served by Heavy Rail Metro or that monorail network that was planned in the 90s and 2000s, which was actually a pretty cool idea in this case, Sound Transit has done a pretty great job of making lemonade out of lemons. And like LA, but perhaps even to a greater extent, they've been pushing light rail to its boundaries and making it comparable to a lot of heavy rail metro systems across the country. It really is great to see an American network do so, and this extension will bring its benefits across the lake and bring benefits to both downtown and 2 major business centers outside the city's main CBD. And this is only set to grow too, with the under construction Federal Way extension of the 1 Line set to open next year, bringing the 1 Line past SeaTac Airport and setting up for a future extension all the way to Tacoma in the 2030s. There's also another extension of the 1 Line to Ballard, and the creation of 2 more lines are being worked on too, with the 3 Line running to West Seattle and the 4 Line from Issaquah to South Kirkland via Bellevue, where it would connect with the 2 Line. both of which, alongside an extension of the T-Link in Tacoma, are under environmental review and aim to be open in the 2030s to 2040s. So yeah, our timeframes are still ridiculous, but Seattle seems pretty dead set on building on the success they've seen so far, which is fantastic to see. It just goes to show that light rail can be a viable alternative to a heavy rail system when it's well planned, both operationally and infrastructurally. And while I'd love to be out there for the opening of the 2-line extension, I can't make any guarantees naturally, but I'm sure there's going to be a healthy turnout of transit YouTubers on that one too. Now, if only they could buy some right-of-way to make Sounder a proper regional rail system, that'd be great. Plus, that could make the Amtrak Cascade service better too, and I'm wandering off again. And now we have some breaking news! In the time I was putting this video together, there's a big story that just came out of Chicago, in that the CTA, the Chicago Transit Authority, just received nearly $2 billion in funding for their long-promised and long-anticipated Red Line extension to the south side of Chicago. Now, this one is a long story of broken promises over the course of decades, and Chicago Transit is a massive rabbit hole in its own right. And unless I dedicate an entire video series to the Windy City, I'll leave that up to the likes of Stormy Cara and House of Transit to be more in depth. But for now, I'll just elaborate on this one. Currently, the Red Line is the busiest route on the Chicago L, and it runs 26 miles north-south from Howard in the north, running underground through the Loop, not actually on the Loop of course, to 95th Street in the south to a station literally in the median of the Dan Ryan Expressway in Roseland. But now, as has been promised for decades and has finally started moving in the late 2000s, the Red Line is getting a lot of love, both from a substantial rebuild of a lot of the line, rebuilding of stations, and the creation of a bypass track to relieve a bottleneck at Belmont Station. And now, there's this long-sought extension deep into the transit deserts of Southside. After a lot of deliberation, it was decided not to send the Red Line along freeways as was done before, but rather to send it along a freight-only right-of-way owned by Union Pacific, which will not only be much cheaper, but serve some pretty substantial transit deserts unserved by the L or by Metra. On the way, it would serve 3 new intermediate stops at 103rd Street, 111th Street, and Michigan, serving Roseland, Washington Heights, and West Pullman, before running alongside Norfolk Southern trackage to its final stop at 130th Street in Riverdale, bringing this extension to 5.5 miles long for a projected $5.3 billion in cost. With $1.9 billion now coming from the feds and another $1 billion or so coming locally, it has enough money to break ground and get started, with construction apparently projected to start later this year and is aimed to be open by 2030. Honestly, it's about time something good happened with the CTA, particularly since it was hard to come by from their, shall we say, controversial CEO, Dorval Carter, a man who famously never rides the L himself. But seeing how the saga of getting rapid transit service to the south side, which is bound to be a big ridership generator, goes all the way back to when Richard J. Daley was behind the mayor's desk, it's so good to see something finally come of this. And this isn't a half-hearted attempt either. This is pretty serious and gives a lot of underserved and underprivileged communities a leg up, and in somewhat a reasonable time frame too. It's things like this that can definitely give some cynical people a bit of hope that we're figuring out that this stuff is good and will be a net benefit to everyone in our communities. I can't wait to ride this when it opens, and I'll make a point of giving it a ride when it finally does so. Sure, it's at least 5 years out, but it'll be a nice treat to see one of America's oldest and most famous rapid transit systems take a big step to being Chicago's transit mode of the 21st century. But finally, to bring the projects to a close, I'll be talking about one I'll be attending in a few months' time. And that's the reopening of one of the long-lost metro stations in my home city of Philadelphia. This year is set to be the year that the long-closed Franklin Square station on the PATCO speed line will reopen for the first time since 1979. And having checked in on progress with it, both with the beautiful new head house at ground level and passing by the station on PATCO trains in the interim, I can't wait to see it open again. Especially since I anticipate that it will serve a lot more riders than it ever had before, and last a lot longer than the other 3 times this station was opened. Yes, 3 other times. I'll elaborate that on my video on the topic. But it's safe to say that this station has not had a lucky streak since it first opened. But times have changed and so has the neighborhoods around the station, and it's very likely that more riders will be incentivized to use this station than in the past, both with changes in work patterns and development around it. There's no absolute concrete date set for it at the time of writing, but I will certainly post it in my community tab and my Discord server, since this is one that I'll be making a point of visiting on opening day, both for its own sake and also for a future video specifically on the history of subways in Philly. Who knows, I may even see some of you there. And with that, that's a somewhat brief synopsis of some of the stuff I'm keeping an eye on in 2025 regarding passenger rail and transit projects. But these are just the ones that are either moving along well or are being completed this year, and I'm sure there's a lot more out there. So let me know the ones that you're excited about or are seeing move along in the comments. And I think it's also good to remember that while things generally on more of a positive momentum than they have been in years, and even a change in administration, while perhaps concerning on some levels, is not going to be enough to bring that momentum to a crashing halt, particularly with activism for this gaining momentum generally, there is still much to strive for, especially since, let's be honest, most people don't really talk about trains that much, particularly for public transport in urban areas, unless you are in a major city that has it. And even then, there's more that can be said and needs to be said in order to get momentum going. There's always stuff to do, from taking an activist role, doing research, working for the transit agencies, or just talking about it with people you know. Or heck, even doing what I'm doing and posting videos or articles on the internet talking about it. Getting people to just consider trains and public transport as an actual alternative to a car-centric lifestyle and a major piece of a solution to the traffic and urban development problems that they cause. It's a way to keep that momentum going, even in times that'll be challenging. That's certainly what I intend to do here, particularly for my native Philadelphia and the northeastern US in general, but also nationwide as well. Ideally, no one should be devoid of an option of public transport, even if it's just a bus service, particularly in a country like ours where most of our major towns became what they are because they were served by railroads, and in many cases, the railroads literally created them. For my part, I have a lot, and I mean a lot of videos planned, both for this year and for more to come. But given the amount of traveling I'll be needing to do to realize them, including a big trip I have planned for the summer, along with possible new equipment to improve the quality of my videos, it's not going to be easy. And for that reason, I'm starting a Patreon for this channel, so those that have the means and want to support my work can contribute to it. There'll definitely be exclusive content for them, a chance to see content early and other fun stuff on there. Though specifically so, I'll be ironing out as of the making of this video, so if you want to contribute, feel free to do so. But no pressure, of course, since there's another way to get the inside scoop of what I'm doing and my conversations about trains and transit, and that's on my Discord server. I'll have a link in the description, of course, as with my Patreon, but it's a chill bunch of people on there and you'll get notified about the latest videos I release to YouTube. Particularly, you can find me on there talking about my videos, different topics, and posting pictures of my adventures, trains I snap shots of, and of course, pictures of my cat being adorable. I mean, just look at that face. So yeah, I got big plans on the horizon, both for myself and the channel for this year and beyond. Since as with every journey, getting to where you're going should be one of the main highlights. It should be enjoyable, a bit unpredictable, full of interesting stories, and I got plenty of them on the docket, particularly my videos covering the Northeast Corridor and general rail and public transit topics. And I want you guys to be a part of it too. After all, it makes it much more rewarding and meaningful to a lot more people if I get more perspectives than just my own and my fellow nerds who take this stuff seriously. Naturally, you guys take it seriously too, and that's why you watch my stuff, but it's good to have my efforts come from a place of an actual conversation being had rather than just having it come from an ivory tower perspective. It's why I like it when people call out the errors I make, at least when they're being respectful and in good faith about it. And it's why I really enjoyed the friends I've made along the way who are providing those different experiences and perspectives, since this is meant to be a way to find out not only how to tell the story of how we get around, but how to make it better for all too. I'm in this quest for the long haul, and if you want to be a part of it, feel free to join in. Let's make the ways we get around better for all, together.